What's going on, everybody? Welcome in to For the Millie. Fun main slate yesterday, and now we get a two-gamer of NFL DFS here tonight. We're going to talk the two-game slate. We're going to talk each showdown kind of intermittently. We'll talk pick six, and of course, we will give our slate breakers for the two-game slate, but we're only going to do the slate breakers once the YouTube show gets to 30 likes. So if you're not watching on YouTube, if you're watching on Twitter, head over to the YouTube chat. You can ask us questions throughout. We're all kind of just hanging out in there as the show goes. And then once we get the video to 30 likes, we will give out those slate breakers already at 11 TwoGun. So it's not going to be too long now, I don't think.
Sounds good. And Jamar Chase can't be the slate breaker. That's like cheating.
We had that conversation a bunch last year, like what qualifies as a slate breaker. And you and I seem to agree a slate breaker has to be somebody who can win you the slate on their own. If the guy's 80% owned and he gets you 40 DraftKings points, he's not winning you the slate. You still have to beat 80% of the field. So we agree there. The slate breaker is going to have to be a little bit more contrarian than that. And with that, let's start with let's go to why don't we go game by game here as we break down the two-gamer. We can kind of talk through just who our favorite pieces are from each team, where we think people are going. So Jacksonville, Buffalo, how do you expect people to play this game?
I expect them to just think that it's going to be kind of like Buffalo's last game. So they're going to use James Cook. They might use Shakir or one other receiver. And if they can fit Josh Allen, they'll fit Josh Allen. I don't think they're going to really think about it that much otherwise. I think one mistake people tend to make on these two-game slates is they try to be very balanced with the two games. I generally preach stack one game more so than the other.
Yeah.
I hope that game. Now, it's funny because the last milli I won was a two-game slate. It was a conference championship. And my lineup was a little bit more balanced, actually, but it was contrarian in other ways. For example, with San Francisco, I only had CMC. That's all I had from that game, from that team. And other people had a lot of Kittle, whereas I had two tight ends. I had Kelsey and Laporta. Okay. So there's different ways to be contrarian, but I think with a slate, everyone's going to be very balanced. The other thing about this is that it's a very affordable slate, which is kind of annoying. It's very easy to build a lineup because the wide receivers, besides Jamar Chase, you don't have expensive wide receivers. You don't really have an expensive running back.
Yep. So
it's a very affordable slate. I think people are going to be prone to kind of doing like a 2-3-2-3 type situation. I think another mistake people are going to make is like everyone focuses on quarterbacks. With a slate like this, defense matters more in being different. And I think everyone's going to want the Bills are probably more likely the Bengals defense. And I think I have three lineups. I do not have the Bengals defense in a single lineup yet. But in the Bills-Jags game, I just think that's just kind of how it's going to be. People are going to be very balanced in the game. They're not going to want to have too many Bills or Jags pass catchers. They probably want to have more than two from a team. And I think that they're going to be very recency biased in terms of which Bills pass catchers they use. I think Shakir will be very, very popular, and they'll fit Kincaid if they can. How they're going to do it.
Yep, I agree with all of that. I think one other thing you mentioned not having the Cincinnati defense. We'll talk more about that whole game, but number one, I agree there because I think that they stink at stopping the run. So I just expect Washington to have a lot of rushing attempts. I think they'll run it pretty successfully. And that largely means you're not getting the obvious pass down situations and just not many dropbacks as a whole, which is where most of the fantasy production comes for defenses. So I like that call quite a bit. And actually, we kind of started to talk about just the Jacksonville-Buffalo game, but one of the things that everyone should keep in mind with these two-game slates, as I wrote about in my article, is that every decision is kind of connected. What you do with the Jacksonville-Buffalo game has to be connected to what you're doing with the Washington-Cincinnati game. So actually, I think the better place to start is with what the typical lineup is going to look like on this slate. And I think that there are probably 4 clicks that are going to go in before anybody else. Burrow, Chase, Higgins, and James Cook. Those are the 4 guys that I expect to be in most lineups. And so if you just do something else, if you if you decide I want to be light on the Cincinnati passing game, or I want to be light on James Cook, that's going to inform a lot of the other decisions you make. So why don't we start there, TwoGun, and say, do you like that beginning of those four guys, the Cincinnati passing stack and James Cook from Buffalo, or do you want to leverage it? And if you want to leverage it, what are your favorite ways to do so?
I don't. Although it really doesn't leave you that much salary for other guys. I think you are leaving out, if people don't use Joe Burrow, they might use Zach Moss a lot. We can look at you can look at their the ownership projections in the optimizer, and he's definitely one of the more popular running backs. I think people are also, I really hate generally stacking a running back with a quarterback, like especially a guy like Zach Moss. You can maybe do it on a 2-game slate like this, but I'll point out I did not do it on my 2-game Millie Maker winning lineup. That was the Lamar Jackson lineup, and I didn't have any of the running backs that last time. So unless you're running a Burrow, if you're running a Burrow stack, I get doing T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, but you don't have to use James Cook. Like maybe use like Austin Eckler or something else to be a little bit different. And I just kind of think all quarterbacks on the slate are equally good. Like I do have a Jamar Chase lineup. I'm sorry, a Joe Burrow lineup, but I don't know. I just think all the quarterbacks are fine. So like kind of like laser focusing on Burrow was kind of bad. And you don't get any real like everyone's gonna have Jamar Chase in the lineup. It's so easy to have Jamar Chase in your lineup that if like Chase has a big game and Burrow has a big game, you're not really like getting a huge advantage on the field. Like especially if Chase has like a mediocre game where it's like still used to like having him, then you're screwed if like one quarterback kind of overperforms. So I just don't like it. That being said, I do have a Joe Burrow lineup, so I'm not going to act like I hate Joe Burrow lineups. But it's just you got to be a little bit more different than that.
When you do have the Burrow lineup, how many of his pass catchers do you have?
I'm probably going to go with 3.
That's what I was going to say. I think you want a minimum of 3 because there are going to be so many double stacks with Burrow that you're just going to have to get so much else right. And so if you're going Burrow, I think number one, you want Burrow to really separate from the other quarterbacks. And we've got 2 pretty good rushing quarterbacks on this slate in Josh Allen and Jaden Daniels. So for Burrow to separate, he probably has to throw for a lot of yards and a lot of touchdowns, in which case he's probably supporting more than 2 guys. So I like Burrow with Chase Higgins and Gesicki, or Chase Higgins and maybe you go back to Yoshavas. Maybe you throw Chase Brown in there and you hope Chase Brown takes a screen pass 40 yards to the house, something like that. That would certainly make it a little bit more contrarian. But I think ultimately, one other point that I want to make with Cincinnati is because Burrow doesn't have rushing upside, there is a path to at least one of his receivers doing quite well, particularly if they get to the 100-yard bonus or catch a bunch of passes where the receiver is still optimal. You still need to have one of the receivers, but Burrow doesn't even come close to being the optimal quarterback because the production is concentrated to just one receiver and it's not coming with touchdowns. He's getting there through yardage and PPR points. So by no means are we saying if you are fading Burrow, you should fade all of these Cincinnati receivers. I think you still can fit one pretty comfortably. You just then don't want multiple. The one exception there is if you are going to Jaden Daniels, there's certainly a path to this game where like all of the Cincinnati passing attack works and Burrow's fine, but Burrow gets outscored because Jaden Daniels and the Washington offense keeps up with them, and Jaden Daniels adds 80 yards and a touchdown on the ground, and it's just so hard to compete with for Burrow. So things to keep in mind there, but ultimately I think we have a really nice setup.
Alex, I'll point out that my Burrow stack is very like heavy on that Washington game. Mm-hmm. Like it's basically, it uses his defense in the other game and very minimal players in the other game. So that's how a Burrow stack can be optimal is, the Bills game, Jags game sucks, and Burrow just lights it up. And, for the Washington side, like Jaden Daniels doesn't have like 3 rushing touchdowns. Instead, Brian Robinson or Austin Eckler get a rushing touchdown. You get what I'm saying? Like that's how it's optimal. When you make these lineups, you have to think about how is this lineup going to be? Like, what sort of game strips in these two games makes this lineup optimal?
Mm-hmm.
You have to think more like a showdown, like a glorified showdown of these things. Don't just think like, I like this guy, plug him in with that, plug him with that, plug him with that. Okay, like this mix. You don't do the mix and match approach. I mean, it could work. It's DFS. Any time, anything could work.
Mm-hmm.
But you're going to be more comfortable and probably have better results long term if you think, how does this lineup win? And I'll say it's very much even more so in pick 6, where that's how you should make your lineups, whether it's 1 game or 2 game. Like how does my lineup make sense that, with these 2 games, like how is it all these picks going to be right instead of just choosing random ones from each game, which is what most people do.
Yep, agreed. If you're watching on Instagram or Twitter right now, head on over to watch on YouTube. You can find that either on my Twitter, TwoGun's Twitter, or the FTN Fantasy Twitter for the link. You can also just go to the FTN Network YouTube channel. We are at 20 likes currently. Once that video gets to 30 likes, TwoGun and I will give our slate breakers for this 2-game slate. But yeah, TwoGun, I absolutely agree 100% with the point that this needs to be treated like a showdown in many ways. And it's actually how I started my article today, where we're telling stories of how these games go. And again, everything is connected. And so one way that you can do that is if you remember the kind of shell that everyone is going to be building around is that Burrow, Chase Higgins with James Cook. Well, you can kind of hit 2 birds with 1 stone there. If you say, okay, what if Buffalo can't run the ball successfully in this game? What if they throw the ball and Buffalo, Josh Allen becomes the stack that you need? Now you're taking, again, you're hitting 2 birds with 1 stone there. Allen stacks overtaking the Burrow stacks that everyone's going to, and in doing so, you're killing that James Cook chalk. So that's probably my favorite way to build tonight. And then the question just becomes which Buffalo receivers. And I think Kincaid has been off to such a slow start. If we had this exact slate in week 1 and Kincaid was $5,300, he would have been like 80 to 90% owned instead of, we might see him like 40, maybe topping out at 50% in single entries. So I think we're getting a big discount in both price and ownership on Kincaid tonight. If the Josh Allen stack is the one that gets there, there's obviously still the potential outcome where they just are able to run the ball all night and they don't really drop back up that often. And they have, these bigger personnel lineups in the game. So it by no means is Kincaid a slam dunk play, but I think he is a really nice discount in both price and ownership.
Yeah, and honestly, when I said like people will fit Kincaid in their lineups if they can afford him, that is kind of what I did too, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I think I have him in. I don't want to talk too much. I have him in 2/3 of my lineups. Like I don't want to give my lineups like it's not that many, so I don't want to talk percentages too much. But it's just so easy to fit him in, and he's clearly the best tight end on the slate.
Yeah,
like if there's going to be a guy that breaks the slate at tight end, it's going to be Dalton Kincaid. Like I just don't think these other guys have 15 to 20 point upside. So we might as well use them. And by the way, like if we want to talk about what happened in the main slate, like you think I would have an amazing day yesterday. I basically more or less broke even because with DFS breaking even, if you're playing GVP only players, actually an above median outcome because it's all about the big wins. But my timing sucks. What, Samuel Porter, Greg Dulcich? Gross. That's why, I didn't have Dallas Goedert. If I had Dallas Goedert in one of those lineups, boom, like I made $1 million. Because I was damn great on wide receiver, that was for sure. But tight end sucked, and obviously Tony Pollard wasn't good. So, break even instead of $1 million win number 6. So tight end always, it is so important. Like, look, honestly, if I look back at all my $1 million wins, tight end played a crucial role in like three out of at least 3 or 4 of them. It obviously played a big role in that 2-game win.
Yep.
Double tight end and not having Kittle. I remember when I had this big win, I forgot that he was the Phillies backup for Zach Ertz. Do you remember he ended up going to Chicago? I forgot.
Trey Burton.
Yeah, he got 2 touchdowns at 5% owned. Like every single time I've had these huge wins, it's almost always having the optimal tight ends because it can really separate from the other guys. And in this slate, like it sounds dumb, but like, what? Unless you really are like triple pairing a quarterback or something, like, do you really need Zach Ertz or Mike Gesicki or the backup to Evan Ingram? Like, you might as well go with Dalton Kincaid.
Mm-hmm.
He's the Jamar Chase of tight ends on this slate.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, that's why we were both so high on Laporta yesterday too, right? It's because if you get a 30-point performance from a tight end, chances are he's separating from every other tight end. That's exactly what got
it wrong all the time.
Yeah, and honestly, like, he might have ended up having a really good game. He definitely seemed more involved. They got into the red zone a lot more than they had previously, or they at least had some more success in the red zone. So it might have gone to him if he hadn't left the damn game hurt. And side note, low ankle sprain, I'm not sure you need to leave the game for, but to each their own. Maybe
they're
it was
also winning.
really painful.
They're also winning, so there's like
yeah.
It happens. Sometimes there's no tight end that separates on the slate, but often if there's at a position one guy really separates, it's often easily the tight end. So
right, because if you get a 30-point performance from a receiver, there are probably going to be other performances that are at least close to it. Maybe even multiple guys get to 30. So it's harder, although Juwan Jennings sure was able to do that yesterday at just $4,000, but we don't need to get into all of that tilt. I do want to shout out Shaw Daddy, however he pronounces that username, $8 into 6,000 yesterday. Big congrats there. And once again, subscriber gets a takedown while using the running back with the highest GPP score on the slate, Kyron Williams, and his 3 touchdowns. So the start of the DFS season for me has been, I feel like I've had just a mix of some really good calls and really good plays and some just killer ones like Tony Pollard yesterday and then the Laporta injury. My afternoon only lineup looked like it had a chance for something really big, and then both Thielen and Laporta leave hurt. Then Juwan Jennings catches touchdown 2 and touchdown 3 and goes over 100 yards. Just like, all right, well, that disappeared quite quickly, but big wins, I think, are coming for lots of us. The GPP scores are doing exactly what we wanted them to do. Getting back to this slate tonight, though, we need, it looks like, 7 more likes to give out the slate breakers. So again, if you haven't yet liked the YouTube show, jump in to the YouTube show and just give it a like, and we will give out those slate breakers sooner than later. Let's talk a little bit about some other receivers. We've got a question in the Discord on who we think is going to be the most popular of the Jacksonville receivers. And we can also just get into the Jacksonville backfield a little bit. But do you have a big read on where people are going to go? Mostly between Thomas and Christian Kirk, maybe even throw Gabe Davis in there.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think they're going to use Gabe Davis. They're probably going to want to use Kirk or Brian Thomas. But I wouldn't overthink that too much. Like, because people are generally not going to want to use both.
Yep.
Or like 2 or 3, which is the interesting thing. It's generally like maybe use 2 or 3 or don't use any.
Mm-hmm.
Is another thought.
Yeah, so my thought here is I think the ownership's going to be pretty spread out. And the reason I think it's going to be pretty spread out is because I don't think anyone is going into this slate thinking, I want to prioritize Christian Kirk, or I want to prioritize Brian Thomas Jr., I want to prioritize Gabe Davis. I think mostly that ownership is going to be, hey, I don't have a piece of Jacksonville yet. I'm on my last spot, and they're going to click the best of the 3 that they can still afford. So if they can afford Kirk, they'll go there. If they only have $5,100 left, they'll click Brian Thomas Jr. If they only have $4,400 left, they'll click Gabe Davis. So I think in that regard, it's just going to come down to what people are left with more than anything else, certainly more so than they have like a strong preference for one of the 3.
Yeah, but again, I think going the other way is better in terms of roster construction. I would generally probably think, okay, either Jacksonville's going to get this ball, their passing game is going to be great, and let's have 2 of them, or they're just not. They're going to either run it with ETN, or they're just going to get stuffed and don't have any of them.
Yep.
I think that's generally what I'm doing with my lineups. Now I'm going to look through it to make sure that's the case. I know for sure in one of my lineups I have at least 2 of them, but the other one might just have 1.
One last thing I'll say about them, I mentioned this in my article too, but since so much of this 2-game slate is telling a story about one offense, your stack in particular separating from the rest, when I'm using a receiver from a different game, I want to be thinking about what is a path for this guy to have success while his quarterback doesn't threaten my quarterback to be the optimal guy that you want. And so one of the ways you can answer that question is who's the guy who can rack up, 8 catches, 70 yards, no touchdowns, not the guy who's going to get there because he goes 4 catches for 120 yards and 2 scores, because that's the type of performance that's going to drag his quarterback along with him. And in that regard, I think Christian Kirk is the preferred Jag in my mind.
I just don't have one. I don't know what to tell you. I just don't have one.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely makes sense. All right. One question we got here is, what is the game script for a Washington win? It's definitely on the ground. And one thing I'll say about their ground game is they're doing a pretty nice job of getting both Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler touches. And they're both getting touches in both the run game and the pass game. And a lot of the pass game work that they're getting isn't, Daniels drops back, gets pressured, and dumps it down for 3 yards. It's designed screen passes, things of that nature, where they actually have the potential to turn them into big plays, which is why Eckler has been around 50 receiving yards in both games, despite only having 3 and 4 catches. So that makes it so that I think you can play both of them together because they have some big playability. And again, Cincinnati has been really, really susceptible to the run, not just this year, but also last year. 29th last season in adjusted line yards allowed, 30th so far through 2 weeks this year in adjusted line yards allowed. So I think we're going to see Washington try to run the ball a whole lot. Yes, that means Daniels on the run as well, but if they can get Robinson and Eckler going, they're going to try to get them both going and just kind of ride those 2 guys all game long. So I definitely think you can play both of them together, no problem.
Yeah, honestly, with a showdown, anything goes. And with running backs, everyone thinks there's this like magical 7 to 10 point floor. Like, no, look what happened with Rondé Stevenson on Thursday, like 1.8. There's no such thing as a floor with any player. Especially a running back or a wide receiver, not a quarterback essentially. So I think you're allowed to get a little crazy with running back on this slate.
Speaking of, the Cincinnati backfield has been pretty frustrating to start the year. Zach Moss has 21 carries, just 78 yards. He's been extremely ineffective on the ground. We're seeing very little Chase Brown. I think Chase Brown only played like 13 snaps or something like that last game, even though he's very clearly the more explosive guy. It's really confusing to me because they were forcing Chase Brown snaps even when they were taking Joe Mixon off the field. And now they're not doing that with Zach Moss, who's very clearly not the running back that Mixon is. So I don't really know what's going on there. Do you feel like this could be a big change-up and we could see a lot more Chase Brown tonight? Or are you just thinking, you know what, it's not going to change anytime soon. They're just giving the ball to Zach Moss, and this is actually a matchup that maybe even he can take advantage of?
I think people are definitely going to overreact and draft too much Zach Moss. Let's just leave it at that. He's Zach Moss at the end of the day. And I think it's probably going to go back. I don't know if I really like – I don't think I have Chase Brown in my – lineups. I think I might have them on like showdown lineup. I don't think I'm really get there on a regular lineup, but it's more of a reason to not roster Zach Moss. Is how I view it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think the only thing I'd say there is, as you mentioned, like pricing is so loose on this slate, it's so soft on this slate that I wish Chase Brown's $4,500 price tag unlocked more doors where. Or at least unlocked more doors that were otherwise locked, because it just seems like, you know what, you can go to the $4,500 price tag, but it's not like Zach Moss's price tag or even like the James Cook, Austin Eckler, Brian Robinson price tags are keeping you from doing anything else that you would really want to do in the lineup. So that makes it a little bit tougher to find a lot of value in this Chase Brown play.
Yeah, again, it's one of those things where it's like, what's the like? What do you get? So. Yep. Sometimes like just because you like a guy, you could maybe use him in pick 6 as a way to look at it. You could do a Chase Brown over Zach Moss under type situation.
Yep.
Just because you like an idea, it doesn't mean you use it. Like we have 3 different ways to play this Monday Night Football game, which is nice. You have the classic, which is what we're mostly focused on. But you do have a small showdown on the second game, and there's pick six, which in general I've been kind of beating the drum of like that you need to play it because it's just a easier way to win than because people haven't really figured it out yet.
Yeah, I mean, we also have the other pick'em sites. I posted 2 plays last night in our pick'em channel in the FTN Fantasy Discord, one of which is still fully playable. It only has players from tonight's games. You can check that out as well if you haven't seen it yet. We are 2 likes away from giving out those slate breakers, so we need 2 people out there that haven't already liked the show. Go like the show, and we'll be able to dish out those slate breakers very, very soon. We've talked through most of the slate. We haven't really touched on defenses yet. I got to say, TwoGun, I have never looked at a slate and thought that the defensive decisions were going to mean less. So I don't know what your thoughts are here from defenses other than don't use the Bengals defense, which I do agree with. But beyond that, I kind of have no idea what I want to do with the position.
Yeah, you just generally need to make it make sense of the lineup, but with fewer options comes more importance per decision, essentially. And, like I think people are going to, let's see, what does our optimizer say like for these defenses? It says the Bengals are going to be used close to 40%, but the Jags are only going to be used about 13%. Like, Jamie Daniels hasn't thrown an interception yet. And obviously, Josh Allen didn't throw one last game because they just dominated the ground, but he's kind of a turnover machine. So, like, I like Jacksonville a lot better. It's just something to think about. Like, people think about defense the wrong way. They think about the spread. They need to think more about, pass attempts and turnovers.
Yep.
So I think the lesser-owned defenses are better in general on the slate.
Yeah, it's also a slate where you can break some typical rules. So, like, you could use the Jacksonville defense against Josh Allen and say, hey, what if they get a defensive touchdown early in the game? And that's the reason why Buffalo's pass rate has to be a little bit higher in this game than it's been in the past. So not something that I like to do on larger slates, but when, 8 defensive points might lead the slate, it opens some other doors, and you don't have to be quite so stingy about your strategic decisions around it.
Right. I wouldn't use a defense against your own quarterback. And I generally would avoid using a defense against a running back. But if you have like a couple wide receivers, that's fine. Because at pick 6, well, now they got to throw the ball to get back in the business, right? I
would even be okay actually with using a defense against my own quarterback. I wouldn't be okay using a defense against my running back, particularly if I think that running back's going to have a big game on the ground. But we cleared the 30 like threshold. So one slate breaker, TwoGun. Why don't you start us off?
All right. I had him in all 3 lineups. Now I just have him 2, but I'm going to have him at least 2. Keon Coleman played nearly every snap last game, total bust because they didn't need to throw the ball. And he's clearly, I think, going to be their alpha wide receiver. So while he's still priced like all the other wide receivers, and he's kind of, his ownership will be kind of lower. I want to, pound that. I want to, get as much exposure to him as possible because there's going to be that game where it's like, okay, yeah, it is Keon Coleman, I think. And I want to be ready for it.
Yeah, I love the call. I would also say that he's led the team so far amongst all wide receivers and tight ends in snaps and snap share. So he's on the field a ton. He just didn't get the looks last game, but looked really, really good in week 1. And as you said, if they throw the ball a little bit more, it's a good chance he ends up being kind of that primary target. Mine is going to be the combination of both Washington running backs, Brian Robinson Jr. and Austin Eckler. And the reason why I think that this can break the slate is because if both hit, it's so much leverage over the Cincinnati offense as well, where it means that Washington is controlling the ball and Cincinnati's offense just won't be on the field as much to actually score fantasy points. So if you're switching over to the Buffalo side, or to the Buffalo stack, I should say, if you're hoping that the Cincinnati passing offense and even Zach Moss fail, having both of these Washington running backs can really get you there. You can do something similar with just one of them. It's not like you have to use both for that to happen. The reason why I think both work so well is that they're so involved in the passing game and they're getting so many passes designed for them so that either one can take it to the house. There's just a lot of explosive play ability from both of these guys. And they also both just looked really, really good, right? It's not just that they're getting the yards that's blocked for them. They both look like they are creating plays and a potential home run every time they touch the ball. So I think that Washington is being a little bit discounted in this game because of how bad their defense is. But I just think that offensively, they actually have a chance to have a lot more success than most realized tonight. So
I want everyone else to know, there's I don't think people have been following that Circus Survivor. I have 2 out of my 10 left. And I think something like 90% of them have already been eliminated. It's been insane. But my 2 that are left, both have the Bengals, win. So I'm out of the Circus Survivor if Washington wins. And I kind of feel like I feel like I'm bad luck for the Bengals because of that.
Yeah, I got knocked out of the Circus Survivor this week with Tampa Bay. That was just one of the ugliest performances that I can ever recall seeing. They were dominated by Bo Nix, who didn't look like an NFL quarterback in weeks 1 and 2. So that was a very unpleasant surprise for me. Let's jump into some pick six now. We talked on Thursday about how we didn't really have any strong feelings about what people were going to do on that pick six slate. I have a very strong feeling about what people are going to do on this slate. They're going to take Jamar Chase more receiving yards. Any others that really jump off the page to you that everyone's going to go to?
Yeah, so one thing I like to do with pick six, DraftKings makes it, it's not easy, but you can, you go through your picks and you can see what everyone picked after the game's lost. And I will say last week we talked about how people are going to go over on the running backs, and they did. Like around a 3-to-1 ratio, they went over, rushing yards on the running backs. I think people are going to tend to do overs on both games, to be honest. It takes a lot for people to want to do an under. And I think everyone's going to see these overs as very affordable. Terry McLaurin looks affordable at 50 yards, but they just don't throw the ball. So that could be, I could see that being a popular pick. I think people are going to probably hammer all the Bills overs, both Josh Allen's and his receivers, and I think they're going to hammer James Cook, rushing yards over because of the last game. ETN looks cheap at 51.5. I just think everyone's going to click the over button in general. There's just almost it's just a matter of how much it goes under. And I've been talking about how I'm, this is my pick 6 year, and I'm, going all out. I have about 57 pick sets right now for NFL. So I'm a little bit all over the place. I'm generally leaning towards balanced pick sets or maybe even unders. Our tool generally likes the overs, to be honest, on yardage for most of these players. On some, it's kind of indifferent, but it doesn't love an under. I will say it doesn't love that many overs. It just kind of likes them a little bit. You can also go with receptions and completions as a way of going on unders if you think one team's going to blow it out. They're just not going to throw the ball much, kind of like Josh Allen didn't throw the ball much last week.
Yeah.
If you think a team's going to blow it out. So I just think that everyone's going to be going over. So in general, it's not an island game, but it's just 2 games. So 6 out of 6 could be anywhere from a 10-to-1 min prize to a 60-to-1. And I'm hoping to get the 60-to-1. I'm hoping people are generally wrong, and I managed to sneak one through. Last night was very high on the showdown, or on the island game, and I missed a 6 out of 6 by 3 yards on Kirk Cousins over. Whoops. Yep. But it was weird because a lot of his wide receivers went over, but he didn't. So sometimes it's weird. And so guessing that outcome is generally best to just avoid it. People got screwed and you just didn't have that correlation there, instead of trying to guess this, trying to anti-correlate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was bummed last night because I thought I was going to kind of cruise to a 6 for 6. The only one I missed was I had more receptions on Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce, along with more completions for Patrick Mahomes. And Mahomes and Rice got there so easily. Kelsey got his 4th reception pretty early in the 3rd quarter and then didn't ever get that 5th reception. So that was a huge bummer, but
I'm
it's
just starting to think
what the strategy is.
I'm not as football centric as some of the other guys, but like I remember a guy, Nelson Salsa, he was off Kelsey all during best ball and stuff. He's like, look, man, this guy's he doesn't care about football. Something he always stresses me is like, this guy cares about football. He's a real football guy. His son plays football, like in college. He was going to play football in college. Like Nelson's way more of a football guy than I am. And he's basically saying like Kelsey's just his head's not in football anymore. He's dating a billionaire. He's on TV commercials. He has his shows. Like he couldn't give a shit about football anymore. And I think it's shown. And I'm not the guy. I'm just going to be off the guy. I'm sorry. Maybe in the playoffs he'll come back.
That's what I was going to say. I think it's also you win as many Super Bowls as he has, and that's kind of all that matters. And so it makes honestly like it makes competitive sense for him to just kind of skate through the regular season, make sure he's
it's almost like LeBron. Like I'm not a basketball guy, but it's like there's playoff LeBron and regular season LeBron. Yep. That's how where Kelsey that in his life.
Yep. All right. Back to pick 6. So if you are starting with a less on Jamar Chase, just because you think that that's going to be the most popular pick and you want that 100x payout, not just the 25x payout, what is your next move? Are you going less on Joe Burrow? Are you going more on T. Higgins, more on some running backs? What's your thought?
Okay. Most of the time I would go less on Joe Burrow. You could do like an over on T. Higgins and just leave Joe Burrow out of it. But most of the time I'm going to take less on Joe Burrow in the same type of pick, which is probably yards. And yeah, if you want, you can go higher on Zach Moss, or you can just go to the other game.
Yeah.
The other thing is you can just leave it alone if you want and make it an island pick. I generally don't like doing that. I generally am going to probably, correlate it somehow or another with some other pick.
Mm-hmm. I definitely think that if I'm starting with less on Chase, my next click is either Burrow less than 262.5 or Higgins less than 48.5.
You mean more on Higgins?
Yeah, sorry, more Higgins more than 48.5. So it's either this right here as the start or that as the start. Both.
Or you can just go straight to Zach Moss over, to be honest.
Yeah, that would also work. The only thing there is I'd be a little bit concerned that I get burned by the fact that they are running the ball more effectively and they are keeping the ball on the ground, but it's Chase Brown who's doing a lot of that, and not.
Or you can take a Chase Brown.
The other thing you can do is you can go Brian Robinson higher on rushing yards. Same idea, right? We just talked about this for the 2-game slate. You can also work that into your showdown lineups where you're just saying, hey, Washington might just really control the ball and keep the ball out of Cincinnati's hands. And this works really well if you're also then using Burrow. So, less on both Burrow and Chase, more on Brian Robinson Jr. rushing yards, I think is a really strong start as well. What do you think you want to do pick 6-wise in the Buffalo game? Because there, I would assume that the most popular pick is going to be James Cook, more than 64.5 rushing yards. Do you think it will be anything else?
I don't know. It could be James Cook more than 87.5 rushing receiving yards. It could also just be Josh Allen, over 234 yards. It doesn't look like that much to people. It could also be, I think, Khalil Shakir, yardage. Although Dalton Kincaid at 35.5, I really don't like that under.
I don't either. It seemed like he was going to get that in the first quarter of last game because they, their first 2 plays from scrimmage, or maybe they're just their first 2 passing plays, were like quick screens to Kincaid. Just we got to get the ball in this guy's hands and get him in a rhythm. Obviously, he got hurt. I think we'll see a very concerted effort to do the same tonight. So this Kincaid more than 35.5 receiving yards might be my favorite pick on the slate, just in terms of like, this is what I expect to happen, not necessarily trying to game any payouts.
And by the way, you don't have to game all of your picks for payouts.
Right.
Like, you don't have to just think unders, okay? Like, you don't have to just be a whole huge hater all the time. Like, I don't think, I have some that are just all overs. You have to think some unders or hope some things that you don't pick go under. is another thing. Like, you just don't pick it if you don't want to and hope it goes under instead of like, because you can still win, you just win less if the other people are right too. It's not like you lose. It's not the same as a DFS salary cap where if you're not taking a player, you're fading a player. It's not quite the same because you still can win, you just win less.
And to your point there, like if Chase does go less than 82.5, the 6 for 6 percentage is going to be low regardless. So even if you take some chalky picks, even if you go more on James Cook rushing yards, more on Dalton Kincaid's receiving yards, and you get everything right, you're still probably getting a lot better than that 25x just from Chase failing in and of himself.
Right. So it's just a sort of situation where like you want some lineups that will hit big if the chalk fails, but you don't feel obligated to take the other side of it.
Yeah. Where is Kirk?
Oh, he's not over for some reason.
Yeah, that's weird.
I don't know why they left him off, but he's off.
Yeah, my guess is he'll be back shortly. I don't really know, but we will see. I think another thing you can take. What'd you say?
They're running out of time to add him back, and they may just choose not to.
It's possible, yeah. Another thing I think you can do is we've talked a lot about Washington having success on the ground, and I do think that they probably will. But there's also a very real possibility that Cincinnati comes out firing, and it's 14-0 before Washington can even blink. And next thing you know, Washington just has no excuse for continuing to run the ball. Eckler's on the field more than Robinson, and Robinson's just kind of game flowed out. And so you could do something like a more than, or let's start with a less than on Brian Robinson Jr.'s rushing yards. Then you can go to rushing plus receiving yards and take more Austin Eckler, 42.5. Now, whether it's, Eckler getting a delayed handoff on 3rd and 15 or something, or getting these check downs because they have to throw the ball a lot, you're getting the really strong correlation between these two. So that's another pairing that I think is just exceptionally strong from a correlation standpoint.
Yeah, another way to think about it, like let's just say, you do like an Austin Eckler over, and you want to say you take actually an over on Joe Burrow, but you use Higgins and Yosibas or Gesicki or whatever.
Yep.
And you just don't take a position on Jamar Chase. You just don't. You don't touch it. That's another way you can kind of you can fade people's picks without fading the consensus narrative. But I just think that in general, looking at people's choices, it's almost always over.
Yeah.
Especially on these island games. There's some dudes that do unders. Like right now, I'm like, because one thing I've been doing is, looking at these pick sets and kind of highlighting good versus bad lineup to see like how much of an edge there is. And like, I'm just going to do right now. I'm looking at the pick set on, for like the main slate. So I just did over Google or searched over 1,007 cells found, under 7-32. So I mean, in that sense, it wasn't like extreme on the main slate, but I do think tonight's game is going to be a little bit more over. Because I noticed on the one game, it was way more overs than unders. Maybe you get a different type of user. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd also say that this game or these games have some good offenses, and they have a lot of people who people want to bet on, right? We've talked about that a decent amount on these shows as well. There's something about who do people want to root for? What do they want to root for to happen? And Jamar Chase is exciting. T. Higgins returning is exciting. People
a lot of the unders were like Elite Neighbors and Daniel Jones. Because it was people's way of, woohoo, Cleveland Browns defense, which whoops.
Yeah.
So it's, you don't have anyone that you're like, I want to take under on that guy in this play.
Yep. Agree completely. I have the completions up here. Do any of these stand out to you as being either too high or too low? There's one that stands out to me that I think is too high.
I'd probably go with Jay and Daniels is too high, but what do you think?
I was going to go Josh Allen being too high. He had 13 completions in their last game, and obviously, like the game script got way out of hand for that. But game one, they won 34-28. He had 18 completions, and the Jacksonville offense has not looked good so far. So I think we could really see another game where there's just not a ton of reason for Josh Allen to throw the ball a lot. And if you're thinking, well, then why are you talking about stacking Josh Allen in the 2-game slate? It's because we're playing for different outcomes. We're playing different games. In the traditional DraftKings slate, in that 2-game slate, I'm trying to get first place out of 277 people or out of 1,000 people, something like that. I need something unlikely to happen. Here, I feel like I can do something that will hurt most of other people since, as we talked about, people want to choose the more than side far more often than they choose the less than side. And yet I get something that I think is the more likely outcome by going with a less than on Josh Allen. But we can kind of...
If he throws a 70-yard bomb, that's one completion.
Yep.
And if he throws, they can quickly be up 21-0, and he can have a lot of passing yards and not that many completions.
He also, in that game against Arizona, when he only had 18 completions, part of the reason why he went over 30 fantasy points is because he had 9 carries for 40 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. So there's also that aspect of it. Every time Josh Allen runs, you're getting even more fantasy points, and he's not getting any completions. So lots of ways for both to end up working, but it's also just remember we're playing different games here. But if we're starting with Allen less completions and or Jaden Daniels less completions, obviously we want to go to receptions next. So any of these receptions for Buffalo or Washington that stand out to you?
I mean, I hate to say Keon Coleman might be a little bit over because he seems to be more of a vertical threat. I do think people are like kind of a little spoiled in Shakir as well as maybe being kind of like a higher one. I don't really want to mess with the Dalton Kincaid one though.
Yeah, I'm in agreement there. Another reason I think to go less on either Keon Coleman or Khalil Shakir is because I think Curtis Samuel could have a much more expanded role this week. We talked about this last week when they were on the Thursday slate. This was 2 Thursdays ago, and we said, hey, do we want to kind of jump the gun and be ahead of the curve on Curtis Samuel? And we said, wait a minute. He was hurt leading up to the start of the regular season, so they didn't get to kind of scheme in a lot of the touches that they maybe want to design for him, really utilize his full skill set. Then they had the short week before the Thursday game. Now they've had an exceptionally long week to get him fully up to speed, really develop his role in this offense. And part of that too is like they've been so run heavy that they've gone with just heavier personnel, bigger personnel. If Jacksonville's able to force them away from just the heavy run script and they want to spread the ball out a little bit, that's going to lead to more Curtis Samuel. So Samuel's not available for receptions, nor are any Commanders, but definitely I think the less on both Coleman and Shakir, I wish we could pair with a higher receptions on Curtis Samuel. But as you say, we don't have to. Knowing that scenario, that possibility exists, can just be a reason to go less on Coleman and or Shakir and not affect anything else.
There's also James Cook at 2.5, which I think everyone just assumes he's going to catch a bunch out of the backfield, and I don't know, maybe not.
Yeah. Yep, 100%.
Josh Allen isn't exactly a check down artist.
Yeah, I agree. Do you how much do you kind of look at some of these projections for players and allow them to influence your DFS decisions in the traditional DFS sense? So, for example, like Gesicki 2.5, Yoshivas 2.5, Higgins 3.5, and yet there's Jamar Chase all the way up at 6.5. So, just looking at these numbers here, you would think, okay, T. Higgins at his price in the 2-game slate probably shouldn't be worth the near 50% ownership that it looks like he's going to get. Or do you just say, you know what, these are 2 different things. The projections that set aren't necessarily efficient, and you just kind of ignore them?
I look at them some. I don't think. I'm kind of in the middle. Like this thing acts like Dalton Kincaid isn't really that big of a deal. And I talked about him being a slate, being able to break the slate as a tight end. Because what those projections don't do is tell you ceiling.
Yep.
It's like a median thing. It's just a very binary. It doesn't matter if he does 240 yards or 100 yards. It's the same. So that's why I don't take it into account too much, because DFS is all about ceiling. It's not about median.
Yeah. They also don't speak to any touchdown equity too, right? Like if Higgins catches 3 balls, 2 of them might be touchdowns and he might pay off in full. So lots to think about. I agree with all of that. Brian, it's okay that you just cut the end of live. We will be done here in a few minutes, so you'll be able to watch the entire thing before the actual slate begins. And we get a question here. Pick 6 valuation. Yoshi lower than 26.5. Chase more than 6.5. Higgins more than 45.5 yards. Burrow more than 34.5 attempts. Coleman more than 2.5 receptions. And then more than 0.5 interceptions. I think you're going to say the same thing here, TwoGun. Brian, I would say that you are mixing and matching too many different things. You're losing some correlation by going like 6.5 Chase receptions and then Higgins 45.5 yards, Burrow attempts. You can go completions. You can go yards on all of them. I think you're losing a lot of really valuable correlation by doing so many different things.
Try to keep it the same thing when you can.
Yeah.
And I use attempts more as you want to click attempts over or attempts under if you click under if you think they're going to dominate on the ground. Mm-hmm. That's just an easy way of it's kind of like completions, but it's even more saying he's just not going to need to throw it that much.
Yeah.
That goes well with running backs under or running backs over. And attempts over is more like the other team is going to score a lot for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And that goes well. You could pair that with completions or yards, but even so, I try not to go too over the place.
Yeah. Yeah. Another reason why this strategy works so well is because a lot of the time you're kind of assuming either success or failure, and you want to keep the definition of success or failure the same for all these guys. So, for example, we talked earlier about the potential for a big play. So let's say you have Burrow completions with Chase yards. Well, if Chase catches a 70-yard touchdown, that's phenomenal for the Chase pick. It's really bad for the Burrow completions pick, right? So you want success, the definition of success to be the same for both of those picks, where it should be a 70-yard touchdown benefiting Burrow because you also have Burrow's yards, not completion. So again, you just want to keep those together so that the correlation is as strong as possible. Anything else that we missed, TwoGun? Any thoughts on either the individual showdown slates, something like that? I will say we're going to post all of the traditional showdown data that we have, the optimal percentage for stacks on each side. So how many Bills versus how many Jaguars. We're going to have all of the captain ownership projections and captain optimal rates in our simulations. All of that will be posted in Discord as soon as we get off the stream here. So if you really want to check those out, go do so in the Discord. But any closing thoughts from you here, TwoGun?
Not too much. On showdown, I think consider Commander's defense and rostering a commander as your captain. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a lot of different ways you can go about playing this Monday Night Football. Don't just be throwing darts and all the different things. Try to put a lot of thought into what you do. If you do a pick 6, put a lot of thought into those pick 6 picks. If you do, don't just start clicking buttons and doing stuff that fits and liking guys, because that's how you end up losing. Mm-hmm. Without really, if you're gonna lose, at least give yourself a shot.
Yeah, I'll give one more out of the box thought here. I think a lot of people are probably going to tune in and they're really excited to stack up Cincinnati against this Washington defense because every single offense and every wide receiver one just explodes against this Washington defense. And to that, I would say maybe give the Thursday through Monday slate another look most weeks. We don't cover it the way we cover main slate. We will never cover it the way we cover main slate. But if you have a stack that you really like that plays on Monday night, go ahead, play that slate, stack it there, so that when they go off, they're actually really, really helping your lineup. If you stack the Cincinnati offense on showdown tonight or on pick 6 or in the 2-gamer and they go off, it's going to help you, but it's not going to propel you to the top of leaderboards because so many people are going to be doing that. So if you really want to just enjoy rooting for an offense against a terrible defense on some of these island games, play the full slate, do it there. Just be Be a really specific about how you're playing these slates, and that will make you feel a little bit better about fading them on these smaller slates where it's pretty clearly the right move, even if it's the scary and not so fun move a lot of the time. All right. That'll do it. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We will be back again Thursday, same time, 5:30 Eastern. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.